Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Podcast. Our guest today is Shree Periyakaruppan. Shree's been in the data space for over 25 years and she has a passion for food cooking and entrepreneurship. I know Shree at a personal level, but before I share a few things, let me thank Shree for taking the time to have a conversation here. Shree, welcome to the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Krish. I'm really
Yeah,
excited to be part of this podcast, and I appreciate the space that you have created here for meaningful conversations. Hello, everybody. I'm Shree Periyakaruppan. I currently head the Chief Data and AI Office at American College of Radiology, which is a membership based organization serving nearly 40,000 radiologists across the United States. I mean, at heart, I'm what I like to call myself a data doctor. I diagnose data problems and design solutions that actually work, especially in complex and regulated environments like healthcare. Outside of data and AI, as Krish mentioned, I have a deep passion for food and entrepreneurship. Um, I, I'm a professionally trained and certified chef, trained in Indian, Thai, sushi, and Mediterranean cuisines. I've authored a couple of cookbooks. I've run a recreational cooking studio for about 5 years, appeared as a chef on multiple television shows back in India, and I've hosted a food and travel series across Tamil Nadu, which is a state in India. I've also founded and operated several businesses, including a 1 gram gold jewelry venture, and today I'm an active real estate investor. I love building things, whether that's data platforms or memorable food experiences, and I love traveling the world along the way. And that's me in a nutshell.
wow, that's a great introduction. What does financial independence mean to Shree?
Financially independent means you're not pretty much dependent on anybody financially. To me, one of the important things is you should be able to manage the money that you make effectively, and you should be able to make intelligent decisions, and you should own those decisions. You just cannot depend. You cannot give the money to somebody else or even your spouse for that matter and say go manage the money, because you have hard. I mean, you've earned that money in a really hard way, so you should have a say in how that money is being invested or how, and take complete ownership of growing the money that you've made. So to me, that is financial independence.
Would you agree if I said that a lot of women in India in particular, right? And we have our audience is predominantly in the US and in Europe, but we do have folks dialing in watching it from South Asia and Southeast Asia as well. So I'm going to speak to some of that audience and experience. If I said, Shri, that in India, women did not necessarily manage their own money or and actually gave it to somebody else to manage the money, would you say that's an accurate statement to a large extent?
No, I think in villages, especially when you talk about in India, it's a myth that women do not manage money, in my opinion, because a large part of India is made up of Indian villages. And in Indian villages, women in general have the power of, I mean, they are the ones who run the family for the most part. Women in India will be able to manage a family even without a man in the villages, in my opinion. If you're in the city, it really depends on how and what kind of family background that you basically come from and how much of financial knowledge that that family has actually given you. I've always been financially independent by nature. I'm the third and the youngest child in my family, and I was born when my parents were in their 40s. So by the time I was a teenager, I had naturally taken on a lot of responsibilities. Growing up, this was long before online payments or apps. Paying the bills or utility bills meant physically going to the places. I would go to the electricity board to pay the power bill. I would go to the telephone exchange for paying the phone bill and so on. Even with the pocket money that I was given, I was very disciplined about tracking what I spent and where the money went, right? And so I think it's all about where you come from and how much and what situations you're put through. So it really depends on that, in my opinion. When I say you should manage your own funds, it means that I have the complete liberty to choose where I want to invest my money. Should I buy gold? Should I buy silver? Should I get into the real estate market? Should I invest in stock market or should I use a fund manager? Because I decided to go into the stock market, should I invest in an index fund or should I go browse for a fund manager? So that should be my decision. When I first came to the US, I realized how different the financial system here was. I didn't understand the retirement plans, the investments, the 401ks, or even how credit cards really worked, right? I managed my own bank accounts, right? But I depended on Arun, my husband, to handle most of the other financial decisions and transactions because he was here before I came in here. In 2012, when we decided to move back to India for a few years, Arun moved first, and I stayed back in the US with the kids for a year. That transition became a turning point for me. When Arun left, I suddenly had to manage everything on my own. And that's when my real learning journey began, right? I later returned to the US and I lived independently for nearly 5 years before Arun rejoined us. During that time, I learned how to file my own taxes, truly understand how 401ks worked and the differences between a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA, when you should do what, and what are the limits and all of those kind of things. I also bought the home that we live in today. So it gave me a lot of experience buying a home. This country, you have to go through a large process, which when we bought our previous home, I all I did was just sign. But this time I went through the entire process. And even how to understand points and the reward systems on credit cards to maximize the returns and savings. And also understand when I should sign up for a credit card and when it didn't make sense to sign up for a credit card, because I've really made that mistakes. I mean, I've gone into a shop and for $100 benefit I would have got a credit card. And these days, I mean, I can run a separate podcast on just credit card points and systems itself, because these days, including my kids, they are not allowed to get a credit card on their own, because I have a daughter who is 18 years old. She got her first credit card on her social security number when she was 14. My son got his first credit card when he was 14. They are not allowed to use additional cards, even though they have it. They are not allowed to use additional cards of our cards. They are supposed to use their own credit cards with their own credit history.
So Shri,
And
what you're saying is when I was back in college in Texas, somebody said, "Krish, here's a free T-shirt. Sign up for a credit card." I'd be like, "Yeah, let's do it, right? I got a free T-shirt." So it sounds like that's not a good idea, right? Okay, I hear you. I think what you've shared there makes a lot of sense, right? You said there was a point of time in your life where geographically things changed a bit, and you were in a position where you had to come up with those learnings. What you said there makes complete sense. But let me throw something here at you. Does that mean the fact that you only had to do it at a later point in your life, right? Not when you were in school, not when you were in college, not before you got married, not for many years. Does that mean? And I'll tell you why I'm asking this question, but let me ask the question first. Does that mean the system failed, Vijay? The system of school failed, the system of college failed, the system of learning, academic learning and formal learning, did that really fail? I'm not just you, but does that fail everybody, that people are only doing these things when they're actually having to do it, as opposed to being prepared to doing it by the time they get out of college?
okay, so I have to answer the statement in two different phases. The first one is that because I did not live in this country before I came here, I did not learn anything from my parents, or my parents did not know what this was. So I really didn't understand the system here because I was not in the system. Okay, so that is one reason. You asked a really good question. So if Shri didn't do it, how many people who are born and brought up in this country are able do understand all of this, and how many of them are truly working towards their financial freedom, in the sense you don't have to work um, to live in this country. So you have to be financially free. See, all of us want to be at that state. Some of them get there in their 40s, some of them get there in their 50s, some of them never get to it until they die. So, which means people who have lived here should all have that financial, I mean, marching towards that financial freedom path. Unfortunately, the school systems here do not teach that. I learned it the very hard way because I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I've learned a bunch of things now. I basically am the one who is training my kids and giving them the financial knowledge and slowly training them through the process.
Which
So
means, Vijay, hang on. Sorry, Shri. You're saying you're doing that to your children, meaning, are you saying that even as of the time of this recording in 2026, that the education system as such is not really preparing? I mean, I that's my opinion, but I don't want to bias your response with that. Are you also saying or agreeing that the formal way of learning is actually not preparing kids for the real world, be it in finance or anything else?
yeah, 100% I agree with that. It's not only my statement, it is also Robert Kiyosaki's statement. A lot of people in the industry will actually tell you that the school system here has nothing to do, it's not training the kids to be financially free. I learned a lot about this by reading the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. I think a lot of people would have read that book. And only then I even started investing into the real estate, right? So, I I mean, I read the book when I was in my late 30s, and my son read the book when he was 12. So that makes a huge difference, right? Again, nobody talks about these books or nobody talks about financial education, even when you are studying finance as a major. They don't set you up for, the system does not set you up to be financially free. They just want you to work and spend, basically, right?
But Shri, let me ask you this, right? Uh, Fair point, right? So you said your son read the book that you read about 2 decades earlier than you did, so which means it puts him in a better place to learn about the future. But let me continue to play the devil's advocate, which I try to do. So there are a lot of times I might agree with what you're saying, which I a lot of times do with my guests, but I do want to disagree or pretend to disagree so we hear both sides of the story. See, we
Okay.
live in a highly competitive world, right? People have to do a number of things just to get by, right? Whether you go to work, whatever it is that you're learning, and then we're going to come to the second part of our conversation is going to focus on data and AI, and enough said about it, where things are going to seismically change in the coming years. So people do feel naturally overwhelmed and anxious. And if you're a doctor or a lawyer, whether you're doing white collar work or blue collar work, most of your life or the day or the week is taken by things that you ought to do just to bring the dollars in. Do people genuinely have the luxury of being able to manage their own money, even if they actually did intend to do it? So I want to understand, what are your thoughts on, do you see people as not wanting to do it out of sheer ignorance? Or do you think people may want to do it actually, but they simply do not have the time to be able to learn how to be able to do this?
So you don't have the time is a lame excuse because you're working hard and you will find a way. If there's something that interests you, you would definitely do it. The problem here is ignorance. People do not know, or the system in this country has not really taught people how to be financially free, how to get to the financial freedom, right? It's not even in people's radar of even teaching. I mean, none of this is being taught at school, in my opinion, right? So people don't know that there is something like this. How many of them even know that 100% of the money that you bring in, let's say X% goes through taxes? What is the take home pay? In that, out of the take home pay, how much percentage is for my basic expenses for food and living? How much should I put in for savings? How much should I move it into for things that I want plus the things that I need? Um, how many of them really work on a budget and then really uh, work towards their financial freedom? I think but hardly like a handful of people do that, right?
Okay.
Budgeting is not even in their thing. They just get the money. Do I have money in the bank? Then I get to spend. That's it. How many of them even know that what percentage of their money needs to be saved on a monthly basis in order to get financially free? And what is the goal? What is their 5 year goal or a 10 year goal? You have to have some goal in life to even proceed and do something against it. If you don't even have that goal, you won't even start working towards it.
Okay,
So,
so let me, sorry, go
okay.
ahead.
So at school, they don't teach you that you need to have financial freedom as a goal.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of things there, right? You mentioned this country. Tell me, is this does that mean you've seen it happen differently elsewhere? Because let's say two of us grew up in India. I did not learn anything any differently back in India either, right? It's just, I went through the schooling system. I was asked to learn a set of things. I was able to learn them to the extent I could, and I regurgitated whatever I did learn half the time, most of the time, without understanding whatever it is that I actually did try to learn, and then got out of the schooling system. So I actually would have thought that this is a problem, but it's a universal problem, not particularly specific to America. Are you suggesting that things are happening slightly differently or perhaps even better in other parts of the world than it's happening here?
That's a great question. So when I grew up back in India, the school system did not train me on financial education, but my family did. And all our families, if you look at it in the state that we come from, Krish, we have a great savings mentality. We save money. Every money that comes in, parents are so much, they talk so much about saving at home. Like every single time you must have heard, even if you did not grow up in this country, you would have definitely heard your parents talk about savings. How did they save this? If they invested in gold, if they invested in a land. So you're constantly hearing that from the family. So you automatically fall into that. You learn because your parents have done it, you want to do it. So you kind of learn it through the family and through the circle that you are in. Now, if you ask me if that is the case here today, I think India is becoming even more westernized. In US, that's not the primary. I think based on the people that I know here, nobody talks about saving when they make the money. Like
Which
literally,
is
they just buy a house. Maybe that's the largest saving. More than that, saving maybe put it in the retirement. Here, if you really think about it, yeah, you put it in for your when you if you're working, you put it in your 401k, and then so that's towards your retirement. And if you want to live, put it into a house. That's pretty much like 80% of the crowd does. There's no more than that. With these two, you cannot get financially free. I'm sorry, you really cannot.
okay. So let me ask you this. One thing I would add before I ask you that is, at least my understanding is that the overall savings across the globe has plummeted, right? As there's more avenues to spend money, the average savings, even let's say in India, for instance, if you see the average savings for the next generations of people coming Gen Z or Alpha and whatnot, for every dollar that they earn, the percentage that they actually do save has continued to plummet, right? So it's not
That's
necessarily just here, but I think it's an impact overall because as you have more access to devices and things that you could splurge on, people have begun to believe like you have the YOLO mindset where you only live once and you're gonna have to blow this thing out
yeah.
before you pass.
Again, I'm not saying invest only in real estate. So that is the basket that you have. You decide whether that is working towards your financial freedom. It should be in an area which interests you, where you're constantly willing to make research. You just cannot in order to get to financial freedom, it's a full-time job. It's like a full-time job. Okay. So you need to work your own work, like wherever you're working. At the same time, it is better to invest into something that you know or you're interested in learning that interests you rather than just throwing it somewhere to somebody. That's exactly what I said, right? You should be owning your decision so that if you are close to that particular form of investment and if you're constantly looking at it, you will find ways to make monies there. It could be crypto. I'm not saying crypto is the best. If it could be, if you're interested in crypto, that's where you'll invest. If you know, if it's real estate and that's what you're comfortable with, you will do all the research that you can to make money. and and if you're interested in stock market, that's what you will insert. So find a mechanism, find a way where you would want to invest. I would say if you're younger in life, if you're like much younger, then you can take the risk and go all in. But if you're getting older, then you should try and diversify. So it really depends on what stage in life you are, in figuring out how to make your investments. Again, all of this is learning. It's a separate financial education classes. Nobody teaches you this. That's the sad point.
I think you made some great points there. Just to summarize it before we switch gears here, right? What Sri is saying here is point number one, just a rough summary of my takeaways here. You ought to be financially independent. That's a given. Two, you've got to take control of your money, your earnings, whether it's passive or active income that you're making. You have to be able to manage that money yourself, meaning you work with people you want to work with, you invest in areas that you feel comfortable and feel more knowledgeable, that you happen to be knowledgeable in. But that being said, you should have more control about over the dollars that you earn, so you can diversify or not diversify, and it's your prerogative. So you have no one to blame or pat on the back but yourself, right? Very, very important points. The third thing you mentioned there was schools and the formal way of education hasn't necessarily caught up. Folks get out of college with a formal diploma, but unfortunately, when you get into the real world, you're subject to things that you've never ever seen in your entire life, right? A lot of your learnings you mentioned came from your family, what was imparted to you by your parents, for instance. So parental education and dissemination of that information to their offsprings becomes a key part of it, regardless of the fact that children spend most of the time in formal learning environments. They come back to the house in the evenings, but they got to learn a lot of it there. Uh, Before we switch gears, anything else I missed in my summary there?
No, I think you got all of it.
Perfect. Thanks very much for those points of wisdom relating to finance. We're going to now shift to something that has absolutely nothing to do with finance, right? But something I was just as interested in when you mentioned it, right? So the next 30 minutes, let's talk just data. By way of background, you mentioned just before we hit record here, petabytes of data, right? Now, for somebody like me who's running a startup, I don't see petabytes of data. I hopefully want to see it one day, which means we have growing. We've grown to that point, right? We're not there yet. So, we're talking megabytes. You're talking gigabytes, which is 1,000 times 1,000. Then I believe it's 1,000 to terabytes. And perhaps another 1,000 if I'm wrong, not wrong, give or take to petabytes. And I don't know what else comes after that, right? I'm sure there's some other English
Zettabytes.
word.
Yeah.
Zettabytes, okay, it keeps going.
Yep.
So that's a lot of data. But just for people to digest that volume of data, Sri, what is a petabyte of data? I mean, I understand, when you're downloading a PDF file with no images, I know what size it could be. When I'm downloading a PDF with a lot of images, I know what size it could be. When I'm downloading a video that's 4K, which is 10 minutes long, versus QuickTime recording, which is an hour long, I have an idea as to what that size could be. But I've only seen like 80 gigs or, the most preposterous thing that I've seen, I'll tell you. But, we do content creation for Snowpal as well, right? When we do QuickTime recordings and we've had lengthy conversations, it does not stinge on data as far as QuickTime is concerned. And I think we've had video files that are like 250 gigs or some insane number like that. And you try to upload that onto iCloud, it takes forever. Even in a world where you live where the data is pretty good, right? Your upload speeds are good. So I understand like 200 gigs. Maybe I understand terabytes because you buy these Apple machines and they're like 2-3 terabytes, right? And you max out those spaces. I don't understand beyond that, to be honest with you. So can you give us some context to what the heck 1 petabyte even means?
Okay, I'll give you an example. I worked for a company called Comscore for many, many years. They are an audience measurement company. So they're very similar to like Google Analytics. In 2007, we were the first ones to introduce tagging, even before Google. So what we do is we place a piece of JavaScript code in people's servers. So let's say you go to Best Buy or you go to Costco.com, we will place a piece of JavaScript there and we will measure every person who comes to that particular site. What that means is it's all cookie based. Um, it cannot be user based because we will not be able to identify the users. I mean, we have some machine learning that we did uh, to convert a cookie to a person, but that's like really, a lot of machine learning involved there and statistical functions. So pretty much everybody in the world who hits a particular site, their cookie gets recorded, and we bring that data into our environment. So we used to ingest 15 terabytes of data a day.
Okay.
Okay. So this was all streaming data. Anything that you do with traditional processing does not work in big data processing. You need different technologies for this. You need distributed processing for this. And even once the data hits our environment, we then it enters our data processing platform. We had a 700 node Hadoop cluster in 2008 to process this data. So this was all on-prem, there was no cloud. So we processed this. Some of my engineers were engineers who basically wrote the Hadoop, first Hadoop books for the industry. So we had to,
So
nobody,
Vijay, hang on. I'm
we
sorry,
didn't have
Sri
books.
again.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you as you go just so I don't forget what you're saying, right? I want to make sure I understand and I follow along, right?
Okay.
So, you mentioned 15 terabytes of data, just so for people to understand. You said it's an analytical platform like Google Analytics or maybe, like a lot of the other platforms out there. So, you're basically gathering data or information like metadata or data about people who are visiting certain sites, for instance, correct? So, when you say 15 terabytes of data, that's a collective number for everybody who visited a certain site. So when you say 15 terabytes, does it, in your example here specifically, uh, does it speak to a single, is it something like walmart.com as an example, right? They're going to go to one particular site and the 15 terabytes is a sum of all the data that you were able to collect of the visitors to that singular site, or was it across multiple sites that you were collecting data about?
It's across the whole world. So let's say who all did, close to, I would say, 1,200, 1,300 plus sites at that particular point in time were tagging.
Okay.
So every single person who is tagging, whoever, whichever user is coming to that particular site, wherever they are in the world, all of that information gets collected and we process that information. So we aggregate all of that and we will provide information like how many people visited a site in a particular month from a particular country, how long did they visit, how many pages did they visit, all of that. So that was the industry that I was working. That was a company that I was working for. It's an audience measurement
Okay.
company.
So
So
the
15 terabytes
1200
is the whole the all of the data from the world per day.
makes sense. So when you said 1200 sites, are they generally all in a particular sector like retail versus
Everybody
healthcare, or is it
across the
across the
board. So
board?
that's where we started, and then I don't know how many sites we went to. We were measuring for the whole universe, basically.
Okay, so that's a good enough example to take, and let's dissect that further, right? Now, the data is only growing by the day, right? Or when we talk,
Yes.
maybe we'll wrap this podcast with a little bit conversation about AI and its impact and whatnot. But before we get there, I want to make understand a bit more about this data. So there's a large amount of data coming through from a number of different places. Now, data is no good unless you make sense of the data and you have actionable measures that you take on the data that you actually do have at your disposal. Now, when you
Hmm.
have data coming in from a number of different industries, right? Be it retail, be it energy, be it semiconductors, or be it software, people buying either B2C, B2B, and whatnot, right? It's a collective set of data that you have. How do you start making sense of the data? What are some initial steps that you take? If somebody dumped a bunch of data on your lap and they're like, Shree, can you make sense of this data? How do you go about making sense of that data?
So that's where data context and data labeling becomes a key. To make sense of any data, you have to understand that data. You have to provide some context about the data. For example, when we started getting data from these various sites, we had a data dictionary. We have a web dictionary. Every website had a web ID, and every web page within that website had a different ID. So it was a hierarchical web structure. So we would map these URLs to web IDs, and that's how, that's an example of what we did. But any data that you throw in there, you have to analyze the data and understand and provide some context before you can even start processing, right? When you talk about creating data pipelines and data processing pipelines, there is some mapping, there is some context, there is some labeling that needs to be done upfront, even to make sense of the data. And that is true even for AI. A- AI cannot do wonders. You definitely you have good data. When I say good data, you should have good labeling and good context about the data, even before you can run any sort of AI on that data. So just
Okay,
because
so
you have data doesn't mean that you can derive insights. You have to spend time upfront to look at the data to see what we can get out of it, and then figure out what context you can provide and what labels you can provide.
okay, fair enough. Let me ask you this: when the couple of things you mentioned here, right? Reasonably simple enough things like how many people visited the site, how much time did they spend on the particular application, or which pages did they go to, what buttons they click. A lot of digital analytics essentially. A lot of that is structured data though, right? I want to call out for the separation here. So
Yeah.
everything there,
Mhm.
is there anything unstructured about that data that we're talking about? Is it all structured data?
In that particular company, yes, we had advertisements, which was unstructured images. So we had a particular image that's sitting. We will for a particular image, how many people like clicked on the image, was what text was there. So that was all there. And the company that I work for right now is all unstructured. The largest amount of data is unstructured data. So we are plugged into 40,000 sites, facilities in the United States. So let's say you're going to Innova Fairfax and you're getting a CT scan done or an MRI done, and the output of that scan is a DICOM image. DICOM is a extension, which is a particular image format. I mean, it's its own imaging format, basically. It comes with pixel data, which when I say pixel data, the imaging data, as well as a metadata about the data, which is called DICOM tags. And this each of these files can range anywhere from few megs to a few hundred gigs, actually. It's possible. So pretty much when we have a piece of software that is running in 40,000 plus sites in the United States, where we get data, this imaging data from these sites on a daily basis. We get about 5 terabytes a day, and we have our total data asset is 1 petabyte. The way that you process these files and make any sense of it is way different than how we would work with structured data. So when I joined ACR, the company that I work for right now, they hired me to create their data warehousing platform. And I was thinking like, what? I mean, they were only saying that their total data asset is a petabyte. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's nothing. That's not big data at all. What are you even talking about? But it completely changed my perspective when I joined them, because when you deal with imaging data, especially DICOM data, is way different than any type of data types that is available out there, or file types that's available out there. The way that you would read them, that you would parse them, that you would cleanse them, and you will structure them or make some sense out of it is way different than you would do with any kind of structured data. So yes, it is different, and you need to understand how these different data types work, how these different file types work, and you will have to design your solutions accordingly. So it's a world of a difference. It's just one solution will not fit all.
Okay, great points there. I'm going to do a quick recap to the extent that I'm able to here, and then we'll chug along. So, structured data was unstructured. The reason I asked that question in particular, Sri, is because each one is no less challenging. But in my opinion and
Yeah.
experience, generally, unstructured data is a different beast altogether because you don't know
Yes.
what to expect. To be honest, and your examples here are pretty on the money, right? You took images and the type of images that they are, where they range from a few megs to a few hundred gigs, and perhaps it's images, maybe it's video, all kinds of variety of unstructured data. Now we'll talk about the size of it that you mentioned shortly. Where the first thing is the very basic question I have is, where do you let's say I have these images, right? They're really large images. What are some ways that you could store? Where is the initial one or two things, like, hey, here's the obvious place to store? Is there an obvious data repository that you would pick today in 2026 to store? By that I mean, what are some tools and technologies that go into the persistence layer of those images?
The best store to store data is an object store, right? So that you can store any type of data. When I say object store, it's very like something like an Amazon S3. Using Amazon as an example because that's what I work on the most. But that's the best place to kind of put in the data, like in an object store. And then there are so much, our cloud platforms have grown, have invested heavily on these platforms, where now you could perform distributed processing, you could perform querying on the data, create a catalog on your structured data. All of that is possible. They've actually simplified all the common use cases that I mean, earlier we used to write code for all of this. They've actually simplified all of this. Now it's just configuring and making sure we are using the right configurations. Really worry about not not how the architecture is basically set up, but really worry about what type of configurations and what the use cases are and design the system accordingly. So we've come a long way in terms of technology for storing, especially for storing data.
Okay, so let's
And
take a no, Sri. Let's take an image, right? Let's take an image
Mhm.
that's a certain size. You mentioned one of the ways to store it is, let's say you put it on S3, for instance. Now you put the actual raw image, right? The raw image of the video on S3, but that's just the starting point. Now you've got to make sense of the image, whether it's an image or a video. Let's keep it one step simpler than the video because the video adds more layers of complexity. Let's go with an image. Let's say it's a high quality image. It's got a lot of information slash data on that image and you've stored that on S3. Once you upload that onto S3, what are some of the next steps that happen so you actually are able to make meaningful sense of that image? Like in other words, I have an image. It's a photo of something, right? Either the image was generated in some way, form, or shape. I stuck that image on S3. What are the next couple of things I might do to tag or label that image, and where does that information get stored about that image?
so really depends on your use case. For us, let's talk about medical imaging that comes into our space. When we collect the medical image, what we do is we really do not want to bring any PHI into our environment. So during the ingest itself, we run some pixel cleaning as well as metadata cleanup, which is called anonymization. We clean up the data before the images and its tags before it hits ACR. Once it hits ACR, because we have touched the file and we opened the file and we have read the file, we create the context of that file and we store that in a structured format or even like a semi-structured format, something like a MongoDB or
But hang
um,
on, Sri, I want to ask
Mhm.
you. So, what the first thing you said was not PII, right? You said PHI. What is PHI data?
personal health
Health.
information.
But okay,
So,
so you want to
like
anonymize. You
some
want to make sure that. Sorry, go ahead.
Mhm. It's like people's date of birth or name, or if they have a node. I mean, if they have a nodule, if they have a cancer nodule or whatever. So those kind of information will be on the file, and you really want to remove the anything that personally identifies that particular person and their health
We ta-
information.
So we're talking an image here. Are we talking about text data that's sitting on the image that needs to be anonymized? Because let's say in my example here, I just went with an image, whatever that image was, right? So there's something personal about that image, about whether it's health related and whatnot. What is the tool that you would use to what do you run that image by? So all of this is actually extracted or anonymized off of that image.
So we do when you talk about a diagram image, it consists of two things. One is the actual pixel, which is the image, and then is the metadata about the image, which can be about like 3,000 tags. It'll tell you all details about the patient, all details about the scanner, the manufacturer of the scanner, the results, but what type of study it is. I mean, it could be you could get a CT scan, you could get you could have three studies in it. You could a CT front, CT the front of the head, the back of the head, the side of the head. So each study will have a multiple series, and each series will have a number of images. So all of this information will also be on your DICOM tags. And what we need to do is do both. One is clean the any PHI. If we find a tag that has got a PHI, we have to clean that as per industry norms. And sometimes you could have the person's name or the person's age on an X-ray or a CT image. So when we have to we have to do some sort of OCR recognition, understand the text. We have to parse out the text and then find out if it is a PHI kind of a data, and then burn those pixels, basically burnt in pixels, clean those burnt in pixels, and then bring that
Wow.
data to the environment. So all of this needs to be done as a precursory step. So we are touching the file anyway, then we bring in the context of that image, where it is stored, what it is stored. So tomorrow, let's say somebody wants to run some sort of AI or some sort of analytics, then we exactly know, let's say I'm looking for I want to find out all the images. I want to do some research on all the CT heads of all women with this particular age group. and who've had a particular condition. So I would have actually provided all of this context, and so you can easily identify what images are there. Then I can pull those images and run my research. So again, really depends on the use case and context here.
No, I think that's very specific. Thanks for that. So you
Mhm.
extracted some data, and now the data that you've extracted from that image in this example here, where do you, that is more structured data, right? You started with an image that's unstructured, but now we're getting to more structured data. Where do you typically store that structured data?
I mean, some sort of a structured format or a semi-structured format. I don't want it to specifically call. I mean, if you want to specifically
No, not in
call
this
out
case.
something
No, I'm just
else,
saying in general. Like, no, not here. I'm just taking a
something
general
like a
example of.
DynamoDB, or yeah, something like a DynamoDB or somewhere which you can store so that you can query that information. And also when you have some sort of AI that run on it, then you exactly know where to look for information and then pull it out. So again, even for AI, you have to provide the context, right? So it's always, so really depending on the use case, you have to find out what context will the AI need, or what context will my users need in order to make some meaningful sense of the data. So that is the use case based. So you have to look at your use case and then figure out what context you have to provide. And you have to see, that's why labeling is key, right? Even when you want to run some machine learning algorithms, you want to differentiate between a cat and a dog. A human is needed to, you know, initially provide what is a cat, what is a dog. I mean, these days you don't, because obviously LLMs are will do a great job, but still you need to provide some context for some edge cases and things like that. So it really depends on the use case. And
Okay.
that's how, like, traditional, the in the generative AI space is, context is, some basic context is always there. Only advanced context needs to be provided. But if you're dealing with like traditional AI and ML, then labeling is key, like, for that particular algorithm is key.
Makes sense. I think it's a good point to you mentioned AI there, right? So let's take a swing at that. Uh, a lot of what you mentioned so far, what you're doing, what you've done in the past, right? In the context of even this very same example, how has that specifically changed with the advent of AI? And if you could speak to specific tools and technologies within that space, like, hey, you mentioned AWS, so we could just stick to AWS. What are some things that AWS is doing in the space of AI and the products that you're using, whether it's SageMaker, whether it's Bedrock? I want to get an idea from you as to what where do you see that going? How has your life become easier because of some of the tools that AWS is able to provide in the space of AI? And how are you doing things differently from what you've done before? And the last part of that question is, how do you see this pan out in the next 6 months to a year as to how little a human has to do versus how much more the tools are actually going to be able to do?
Okay, there are like 6 or 7 questions there, so let me try to
My
part
bad.
one at a
Sorry,
time.
I tended guilty as charged. I do it all the time. My first question really is, how has the processing of this, everything we've said so far, Shri, how has that changed? If has it changed, by the
Mhm.
way, with the advent of AI? If so, how
Generative AI.
has it changed essentially?
Okay, so with generative AI, yes. So the way that I would look at this is, there are big waves that completely change the way that how people in the world operate. It completely transforms all jobs that a human has ever previously worked on. So one of the first inventions is electricity. Before electricity, everything was like manual, physical. So a human being, in order to do something, they would use their hands and legs to get certain things done, right? Whether to make something, or it's all about physical work. The advent of electricity, I think there are only three major things that has completely affected human life. One is electricity. After the advent of electricity, everything became, the manufacturing industry grew. The way people started working on stuff was, the number of physical activities kind of reduced, and the men learned how to use the machines. So the people, instead of actually making something physical, they learned how to operate the machines. So that's how their lives changed. So that's number one. The second invention was uh, the computers, the World Wide Web. So this automated human brain. What a human actually did using their mind and math, computers was able to do at a much faster rate So it completely changed the way nobody, like humans, did not use their mind to calculate anything. Like these days, we don't even use our mind to calculate everything. Everything is computerized, everything is done digital. So that's people no longer had like physical books or papers or manual. Everything was computerized. Everything was basically digitalized. It completely changed the world, how humans interacted and in their day-to-day life. So that's the second massive change that happened. AI has been there for 50 years. Nobody cares about AI at this time. It didn't make a big impact on humans. Generative AI will. So, this generative AI is now bringing the manufacturing and the human. So, it's both physical and mental, right? So, it's all bringing everything together. So, this will completely change how people have operated so far. So, it will become part and parcel of everybody's life. Generative AI will become part and parcel of everybody's life. So if you're thinking that this Gen AI is not going to affect me, you're so wrong. So that was to answer your first question. And then you asked how it is changing today, how it is changing people's life today.
No, hang on.
Productive.
Shri, my question just to be, it was more specifically the example that we just talked about, right? With imaging and processing and collecting data and storing in, say, Amazon DynamoDB, for
Uh-huh.
instance. A lot of that could have been done with absolutely no AI technologies per se, for the most part, at least, right? There's some that could have played a role. What I would like to understand is how has some of the recent innovations in that space of AI and what AWS has provided
Mhm.
made that activity or an activity like that easier or more viable?
So I'll give you exact examples. When I joined ACR, we had a 10-member team whose primary goal was to get these images and pixel clean the images. So they will manually open up every single image that we get. If they find a burnt in pixel, they will clean it. Then we started using, at some point in time, we said, this is so manual, so let's automate it. And let's use AI to do so. So the concept was we'll take an image, we'll run OCR against it, we'll parse out all the text, we'll get the text and run that something through like Amazon Comprehend, which will tell us whether it's a PHI or not. If it is a PHI, then we will find out the pixel position where it has to be cleaned out, and then we'll send it back to the imaging solution that will clean it up, right? So when we started looking at the data, when we ran the OCR, we found out, I mean, even when people were looking at the data, 40% of the images did not have any text in them, right? So, but unless you open the image, the person will not know whether there is text or not. So there were like 10 people who were constantly opening up all of these images and then cleaning up the images, and that was your full time job. AI came into play. Now we automated this process off the bat. 40% of the images they won't even look at because AI will tell them that there's no burnt in pixel there, right? There's no burnt in text there. And out of the other 60%, we will take the data and find out what the text is. And only 10% might even have a PHI text in there. Then only that 10% of the images needs to be sent back uh, to the humans to actually open up and then verify after it has been cleaned, right?
Great example
So
there, right? So,
right.
sorry, go ahead.
So these are the kind of productivity things that really AI can actually help. Generative AI has taken it to a completely another level. You'll be stunned to hear how we are leveraging generative AI. So ACR is a big medical imaging hub. We provide data for like research purposes, and we are also a big player in AI validation. When I say that, let's say there is an algorithm manufacturer for detecting cancer for a particular condition, right? That AI algorithm, before it can be deployed in the industry, has to be FDA approved. FDA, the government relies on companies like ACR to run and verify if that AI is working fine. So the AI manufacturers work with us because we have the data. We take the algorithm from them. We run the algorithm against the data that we have, against the images that we have, and we provide a report to the government. And only then, and if all works well, only then, FDA approves that particular algorithm. Once an algorithm is approved and available in the industry, a site, we also help the site to find out which algorithm works best for them. We launched an accreditation kind of a registry, the first national AI governance registry in the United States. In the medical field, radiology is the first department to kind of do so, to have a AI registry to monitor quality of AI algorithms. What that means is we are already plugged into 40,000 sites. In this, let's say one of the sites is using an AI algorithm. What we do is we take the radiology report that the radiology writes for that particular patient. We get the radiology report. We also get the AI result from the AI manufacturer. What we do is we parse out the radiology report. The radiology report is a report. It's a text. It's a PDF, right? It's a text file. So we take that, we run an LLM against it. We parse out exactly what is the result that the doctor has written on that radiology report. And then we compare that result with that of the actual AI result. And we find the concordance. And then we share it back to the sites. And we also share it nationally. We can also figure out how well your algorithm is performing, as opposed to, that algorithm is performing in your site as opposed to how well the algorithm is performing in other sites that have deployed that algorithm. So generative AI
Well,
has helped us with that process.
Shri, that's an amazingly specific example. I appreciate it. The more specific the example is, the better it is for our audience to generally digest and understand something. You said it beautifully. I only have a couple of questions out of curiosity. One is, when you go pick these LLMs,
Mhm.
that's a pretty laborious activity, right? There's many things laborious in this process in general, but that, in my experience, has been not necessarily easy because there's no dearth of these LLMs, right? Now, again, in your space, it's medical related. So perhaps I don't know how many there are out there, but if you take a general field, there is actually a large number of these LLMs that are available, and making sense of which one makes the most sense to you, which model to go with, actually is a lot of this initial learning process. How do you go about making those decisions? Like, how do you know that this is going to actually work better? By better, I mean that this does the job better, that this is actually more scalable, and perhaps last but not least, this is actually more financially prudent, and it doesn't pinch your pockets as much, right? So there's a variety of factors that play a role there. How do you go about making those initial decisions? Because correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes you go, at least as a startup, right? We don't have the luxury of prototyping for a while. That while could be 3 weeks or 6 weeks, and then we learn something differently and go back on it because it's time wasted, right? Time wasted, resources wasted. You don't have the luxury. Now, a larger organization might have a little bit more of the luxury, but generally speaking, you don't want to waste your dollars in learning things that don't have to be learned. So, what are some of your initial steps in making sure that you take the right approaches when it comes to these technologies, even if it's within the umbrella of AWS, for instance?
Okay. So there are two questions there. So let me answer the first question about LLMs and prompt engineering. That is the key, especially in this example that I gave you for parsing out radiology report. My prompt will be different for each use case. For example, if I want, I mean, one of the use case would be I want to find out whether this particular report has any nodule or not. Or or one of my other use cases be, if I have a nodule, what is the size or where it is located. Each of that is a separate use case, and my prompts are going to be different. And different LLMs might work best for different manufacturers. Like if you're scanning the report from a Jiggy machine versus you're scanning a report from an LG machine, like really all of that also accounts for it. So prompt engineering and picking up the right LLM is a pain point, obviously. So initially, we had to involve radiologists who are already very busy. The number of radiologists in the country is decreasing day by day, but we still need their help. You still need the SMEs. So we started with them. So they gave their initial feedback. Then The goal is to run agentic AI, like run agents on top of agents. If I choose a prompt, then is it actually giving me the right results based on what the radiologist already said, right? Or they've already provided. So you run agents on top of other agents and it's self-learning. These agents are like self-learning. So these are all advanced concepts. Once you, I mean, with traditional prompt engineering and traditional one-time picking up an LLM for a particular solution and all is not going to work. Constant monitoring, constantly iterating stuff, and constantly running agentic AI, like really leveraging LLMs to learn, self-train LLMs to learn is really, really important. So these are all some advanced concepts that you will get into once you start writing one agent, then you will then of course you will start writing agents of agents. So that's one part of the problem. The other thing is that you started with doing all of this with, does it cost a lot of dollars? Like, a lot of people think that you need a large amount of money for initial investment to innovate with AI. Um, so I'll start with a myth that I want to break it right away. You don't need deep pockets to innovate with AI. That is for sure. What you really need is curiosity, clarity on the problem you're solving, and the willingness to use what's readily available. So AI has definitely a reputation for being expensive, massive infrastructure. You need large teams and long timelines. But the reality today is very, very different. The cloud providers, the government, the open source community, they have all done so much of heavy lifting. In many cases, your prototype would have already been paid for you. You just need to accept the invitation. You just need to keep your eyes and ears open, right? Um, and obviously, most of these cloud vendors give you a lot of cloud credits because this is so new and everybody wants to venture into AI. The cloud credits would be the fastest way to get started. The programs from AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft, there's a lot of them. They offer tens or even hundreds and thousands of dollars in credits, especially for like startups, nonprofits, and innovation focused teams. All you just need is a solid use case that you can convince these cloud vendors to fund for your initiative. If you're working with a certified cloud vendor, the barrier to entry is much lower than people expect because they need your business, right? So once you get your access, the next question is how fast can you build? And there are things out there. I'll name some of the technologies here. There's Hugging Face, there's LangChain, there's Streamlit. You can just go from an idea to a working demo incredibly fast. So you just have to be, I mean, as I said before, you just have to be open to what is available there. You can host demos for free, spin up upfront, infrastructure in minutes. You can build proof of concepts for very less dollars. And that's a game changer for innovation teams today, right? Another overlooked angle is cloud migration funding. If you're already having, if you're already running legacy systems, the cloud providers will actually help fund your move through programs like AWS MAP, which is called Migration Acceleration Program. There's Azure's migration programs and the Google Cloud initiatives. So it's not just about moving servers, right? It's also unlocking cloud native AI like capabilities without taking up all the costs upfront. I would say if you're just doing a lift and shift, you should really think about your strategy. When you move to the cloud, you should really look at, ways that you can leverage cloud native capabilities. And
Okay. Now, sorry, go
one
ahead.
last
Finish your
thing.
thought.
Yeah, one last thing. Beyond the cloud vendors, you also have public funding. So for nonprofits like us, there's a lot of funds that is out there. We can write grants and we can tap into the dollars that are available in the industry.
So those are phenomenal points, Sri. So appreciate you sharing those. I'm going to take a slightly different view on one of those, but again, there's no real simple answer here because
Mhm.
I talked to a guest recently, right, who's in the space of managing data centers, and there's a few things I learned from that conversation that I'm going to share here, and I think you might find some of it interesting. He mentioned, just the cost of building and managing these data centers. It's a phenomenally big number, right? The hyperscalers reported earnings. They continue to do it. I think Amazon's going to report next week. A bunch of them reported last week. And the capex spend has been through the roof, right? Meta reported $60 billion in expected spend in the last quarter. They increased it to 150, $160 billion, give or take this time. And it's no different. Microsoft, I think, said something along those lines. While Meta was on, the market reacted differently. God knows how the market reacted. It reacted positively to Meta's spend. It reacted very differently to Microsoft's spend of whatever they mentioned it was. And they plunged like a 10%. So what I learned from one of my guests was the cost of NVIDIA chips. I did know that prior to that as well, but he just emphasized it further, are ridiculously expensive. And the thing
Mhm.
is, there's a lot of takers for it, right? You need a lot of money. The people like Larry Ellison and Elon Musk are after Jensen Huang to actually procure these chips. So it's not available for the regular people. By regular people, I mean even larger companies don't have the money to compete with these organizations, right? So that's something to keep in mind. But what I wanna ask you with that specifically is just to get your thoughts on. You mentioned agents a couple of times. I know people are generally familiar to some extent with AI agents and what agentic AI is, and it's all fluid, right? Things change all the time.
Yeah.
Anthropic released something called Cloud Coworker not too long ago, right? It's one of the recent launches. Things are continually improving. But as a startup, I'll tell you that it's still expensive. Now, there is cost saved because you don't need as many engineers or people in the team to do it, but you are spending that money on hardware, right, of this nature, right? Paying for NVIDIA chips or paying for, if you're not NVIDIA, if you go the other side, which is Broadcom's ASIC chips, right? Custom made for applications. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of activity in the space given. What I want to ask specifically when it comes to agents, right? Uh, there's when you're creating a solution today,
Mhm.
Shree, right? When you're creating a solution today versus what you did 2 years ago, right? And it may be relevant to what you're doing, or maybe it's slightly different, but I still want to get your thoughts on it. 2 years ago, when you built websites or web applications, 2.5 years ago, you did that using a lot of AI tools. Sure, right? Things are improving, things have changed the last 2 years dramatically. Yet you did that using AI tools and technologies, but for human consumption. And what I mean by that is 99% of the time, if I could use that number loosely, those sites were built for humans to use. That is changing quite dramatically. Now, when you're
Mhm.
designing a site or building a piece of software, you're actually doing it for humans as much as you're doing it for agents. And maybe 2 years down the road, maybe it's purely agents traversing these websites, and maybe there's not that many humans in the mix. So I want to get your thoughts based on your recent experience on when you're designing software, when you're trying to solve some problems using technology, whether it's AWS or cloud, Google
Mhm.
Cloud or Azure, it honestly doesn't even matter. How
Mhm.
much are you thinking about agents consuming your solutions versus humans consuming your solutions?
100% we look at agents consuming the solution, because if you're building something right now, you better build something that will, because that's where the world is going towards. So one of your statement was, what did you do before and what are you doing right now, right? Before, the one of the first things that I would do is go procure hardware. If I'm writing a website, I need to spin up the server on my environment. I have to make sure the necessary hardware is there. Even if I'm running some sort of AI, there is a time, even like 5 years ago when I joined ACR, we bought a GP machine for like $150,000, which we hardly used. Now, those are the kind of things that we should avoid going forward. If you're in the cloud, you will just pay for the consumption. You'll just pay for the consumption. You're not paying for the entire machine, So instead of paying $150,000, you might end up paying $3,000 just for the consumption, right? The second thing is, a lot of our websites that we build today um, are microservice are like microservice based, and we don't even have like a website. They're very slim, they're very sleek. Um, they are just the entire architecture and design are so cloud native, and if you follow that particular architectural pattern, you're definitely setting yourself for success for like future type of AI, like agentic AI kind of scraping your website and things like that. So I would say gone are the days where you're going to procure something, you're going to write a lot of code and like monolithic applications. All of that need to probably go away. And I think in a matter of a few years, you will hardly see any monolithic applications. People will modernize, digitalize. They will get into cloud native platforms and processing and services. And all these platforms are constantly improving. And you know what? You're only solving a use case. You're not solving the technology problem. The technology problem is going to be solved by the giants like the AWSs of the world and the Microsofts of the world and the Oracles of the world and all of that. So you're just only worried about your use case and not about technology, advancing the technology. Because earlier, I am responsible for everything. I'm responsible for the technology. If I want to do data quality checks and I only need a tool that does a quality checks for me, I don't need to write a tool. You know what I'm saying? So the world is changing. So that's how, that's why you need to be in the cloud. That's exactly why agents are going to be revolutionary.
Great answer,
It's just
right?
going to change. Yeah, it's just going to change how we work.
Okay, so let's say we wrap this up in the next 15 minutes, if that's all right. And I want to ask you rapid fire questions, right? So, whatever your
Okay.
answers are, within 30 seconds to a minute tops, right? And excuse me if I interrupt you there because I want to use the next 15, 20 minutes to get a bunch of different answers. And it's in no particular order. It's basically based on what you've shared with us so far. We appreciate it quite a bit, needless to mention. A lot of these questions stem from that. They're not coming from outside of this conversation, at least for the most part, right?
Okay.
So let's get started. Next 15 20 minutes is Vijay sharing her learnings in the last n number of years across the board.
In
um,
like one line answers. Okay. Fair enough.
not necessarily one line, but 30 seconds to me, you know what I mean, right? And if
Okay.
it's
That's
longer,
fair.
I might, and my apologies if I interrupt you. First question. We are at the top of 2026. Say Shree graduated from high school yesterday. Is Shree going to go to college?
Yes.
Why does Shree want to go to college in 2026 and spend 4 years from 2026 to 2030 learning formally through college, however they disseminate that, and getting a diploma while things are changing at the rapid pace that you just mentioned?
Because Shri has got a lot of curiosity, she will learn like, she will get the maximum out of the university. She's just not going to the university to just listen to what the professors are saying. She's going to completely look at what all the assets that are available for her. And going to a college is definitely going to help her. And Shri also went to college even last year. So, yes.
Okay, that's very okay. I was gonna go to the next question, but I cannot. I'm gonna have to stick to the first question. A lot of what you mentioned there, right? I mean, people believe in vocational learning too, right? If you're learning almost all of the things that we spoke about in this conversation, Sri, uh, feel free to disagree. I think we learn more of that by working with people in the real world and doing it in real time and solving real problems as opposed to opening up a book that was written 3 years ago and by people who may or may not be actively working in the industry. And actually, I have respect for teaching and professors, don't get me wrong. But do you still think that learning at the pace at which somebody can learn by going to work is going to happen by going to formal education? And is it worth the $100,000 that somebody's going to borrow and spend on it?
I'll give you my 2 cents. Shri went to the Chief Data and AI Officer program at Carnegie Mellon a year ago. And even though I've been in so many summits, I've been a speaker myself in multiple podcasts, I have learned a lot in that Chief Data and AI Officer program. And it has completely changed the way that I would architect and design systems and how I would have devised strategy, because these kind of curated programs curate a lot of materials throughout, brings a lot of people's experiences together, and it gives you what the industry needs are. So this is a little different than the 4 year university. But what I'm trying to say is this has really helped me, because if not, it would have taken years for me to get to where I am, uh, really trying to do all this myself. So this gives
Fair.
me, it gives me a leap over others, because I went to this program and I got the most out of it. So similarly, I think college programs, even though you can get a lot out of the industry, yes, you should, but doesn't mean that you shouldn't get a formal education. I think that's also going to give you the basics. And I'll also tell you what I learned about operational research and my statistics that I did, and even the integral calculus that I learned in my 10th grade. I've applied it when I learned machine learning 4 years ago.
Okay, good answer. But I will tell you, personally, by virtue of speaking to people, you may or may not be surprised, but the breadth of answers I get here is just phenomenally interesting. I've got a flat like, nope, I wouldn't borrow a dime to go to college in 2026. Two, people have gone the further extreme than even what you mentioned here, saying, you know what, I would not change a thing and I'm going to go through the life of going to college because it's not so much just academic learning. I want that 4 years or whatever the time frame is to learn things that I would not otherwise be able to pick up in college, for
Yeah, I
instance, right?
wouldn't disagree with you at all because there are two people in my own family who feels that, including my son, who will feel that going to university is a waste of time. But I think it's also the character because those kind of people will spend additional time. They will really, I mean, it really depends. So I'm a kind of a person who will thrive in a university setting and it'll give me a focus. So it also depends
Fair,
on the
fair,
people.
fair
It
enough,
also
right?
depends on the
Okay.
people. Yeah.
No, appreciate that. So next question. Um, we talked about college and whether it's good or bad, right? That's a fair point. Next thing I want to know is what are some of the skills that you think, again, in a minute or so, right? Because you mentioned that when people are manually looking at these images, now the tool can do it without having manual intervention, which is across the board. So, whether you're in law, and I had somebody tell me the other day, even in the space of in medicine, as general practitioners, there is going to be a lot of impact there. If you're a surgeon, maybe you're all right for a little bit of time before robots and optimists maybe come after your job. But for general practitioners, it's going to change ever so quickly. You'll be talking doctors here, right? Which means things are changing at rapid pace. The tools are able to do a lot of this stuff, and people are wanting to spend less money going to these professionals. Given all of that as sort of background, what are some skills that, if let's say you said you would want to go to college if you graduated yesterday, what are three skills that you would actually want to learn, whether it's in college or outside of college? What would you learn to make sure that you have a job by the time you get out in the next 2 years?
I would want to learn about some industry, about one industry, because you need to know, because you need to work in that industry, right? So it can be healthcare or finance or whatever. So you need to have some background knowledge about that particular industry. And I would also need to know how to leverage AI in that industry. So those are the two skills I would want to learn because AI
Okay,
will
let's
not,
get. Sorry.
yeah, because AI will not replace your job. Only a person using AI will replace your job.
Okay, I've heard that one before. Uh, I want to say a couple of things about that, right? Okay, there is a person who knows how to use AI versus a person who doesn't. Okay, fair enough. I accept that. But my question more specifically here is, if you needed 10 people to do a job, right? I talked to a founder, Shree, who's based out of Australia, who said like the 50 people in the engineering team down to about like 8 people, right? Now at Snowpal, I'll tell you, we always had fewer people than we could have possibly used as a startup. And even before, AI, the world of AI, we were a very lean team. And now we can only have more reasons and, justifications to become leaner, if you will. So there are not, I mean, do you believe that there are not going to be as many traditional jobs in the next 2 years as they are today? Like, which school of thought do you belong to? Or do you think the number of jobs is going to sort of stay the same?
So I think all the traditional positions will go away. You may not have, because I was at a summit and I did present this. In a few years, you will have the same person who would do the BA, the DA, the QA, and the development. Everything because of AI, right? You would have all your roles will collapse, and you will have a single where you had 10 people doing multiple things. You'll have one person doing that, and that one person will also be doing more. That being said, there will be other types of jobs that we haven't spoken about. People don't know these kind of jobs. I think data governance is going to be a big deal. There'll be a lot of jobs in terms of AI and data governance and controls and HIPAA. All of those jobs are still not in the market right now, or they're not as big as it is today. When you talk about AI, in your traditional software development, you developed software, you deployed, and you forget about it because you tested, you did everything, and you're all good and you're done. But when it comes to AI, when it comes to agentic AI, and you have some sort of AI running, your job starts the day you deploy because you have to constantly monitor it. You have to look for drifts. You have to look where things are going wrong. There will always be a human on the loop rather than in the loop. Today we are in the loop, but there will be humans on the loop, and those kind of jobs are definitely going to increase. So yes, there
Okay.
will be changes. There will be changes in jobs. Traditional jobs will go away. It's very similar to like when I said we had three different types of tsunamis that came in. One when we had electricity, one we had World Wide Web. It completely changed how people worked, right? So similar to that, there'll be new jobs, and the old
Okay.
traditional jobs will go
Uh,
away.
Agreed. Next question. Say we have 10 minutes. I'm going to squeeze in as many as I can that come to my mind. Tech companies, right? Let's say if you look at the stock market, I'm going to take a random bunch of companies that we've recently actually invested or traded in. Micron Technology, right? Let's say they've gone up, I want to say about 100% in the last 5 weeks, give or take. Seagate Technology, memory company as well in that space of Micron, gone up maybe about 70% in the last, again, these are numbers I'm recalling, so take it with a grain of salt in the last 4 to 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I can think of three other companies, and if you take energy companies for instance, or companies like CoreWeave that Nvidia claims, not claims, Nvidia is investing in every so often. You have a 12% fluctuation on an average day, for instance, right? The stock market has been in an absolute state of frenzy for the last 2 to 3 years, for instance. One part of the world is like, you know what? Things are going to get, there's more and more money going to go into AI. Hyperscalers are spending more money. There's no end to this in the near term. For the next 2 years, things are going to keep going up. There's only one direction the market can possibly go in. But the other side has enough reason for caution, right? I'm talking about something Michael Burry said like a couple of months back, where he had shorted like Palantir and I think Nvidia, but perhaps he closed the short positions at that time. So there is genuine fear as well, right? When things go up 100% in 6 weeks or so, when Micron goes from being a $200 billion company, maybe it's a $400 billion company. And I'll end this with one more point here. I want to get your thoughts on it, which is after Oracle reported their earnings the last time. I used to work for Oracle years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not that it has anything to do with this, but they went up to $345. I'd
Yeah.
never ever seen a company like Oracle that's been in the business of software, one of the best companies I know out there, go get into a state of frenzy and go from $200 to $345, right? And everyone's like, you know what? This is not going to end. It's going to keep going. They have like $600 billion in remaining performance obligations. There's no end to it. Fast forward 6 weeks, Shree. Oracle is $170, give or take,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So reality check can happen because a lot of the money is cyclical. Nvidia is putting money into OpenAI. OpenAI is putting money
Yeah.
into Oracle. Oracle is putting money into OpenAI. It's all a bunch of people spending money on each other. So for everybody, and it's not fair to give you 1 minute because the question itself was like 3 minutes here. What what are your thoughts on the frenzy? What are your thoughts on these companies, specifically speaking, or perhaps you can add more companies into the mix? As somebody who likes to manage money, like you said at the top of this call, as somebody who's also investing in the stock market, how does how do these companies come across to you as they are priced and valued at the top of 2026?
This is very similar to the 2000 dot-com bubble, in my opinion. So it needs to settle. So something is, in my opinion, something is going to happen. I'm not here to predict. That's why I do not want to get into the market at this time. I mean, that's my strategy. I
So
just,
hang on, it's
because
an
it's too.
important, hang on, Sri, you're making an important point. And again, none of this is financial advice, but we still want to hear from people who are actually putting real money. You said you don't want to be in the. So is Sri somebody who's taking $100 out of the stock market today because Sri is not exactly sure what the heck is going on there?
Shree has taken some money out of the stock market, and yeah, and invested elsewhere. Yes.
Is elsewhere, if to the extent you can share, if you cannot share, that's fine. The elsewhere, is that also in the stock market but in a different sector, or is it money completely out of the stock
No.
market into perhaps
Yeah,
metal
out of
like
the
gold
stock
and
market.
silver?
Yeah, out of the stock market into other means.
Wow, is there are one of those two things you can share with us? If not, not no problem.
No, I do like shit. I do investing in metals, and I also invest in real estate. Yeah.
Okay, good point. Sri, you mentioned that you compared this to the dot-com bubble, right? There's one thing I want to add here quickly. From the recent comparison to the study I've done personally speaking, there's one fundamental difference between the stock market in the 2000, right, the dot-com bubble versus today,
Hmm.
which is, in 2000, these companies that were going up in valuation, they actually did not report great numbers, right? Some of them are not, a lot of them are not even profitable. The thing that makes this time a lot more challenging for people to make a prediction on and to see the crystal ball, if you will, is because the companies are actually making real dollars. And I'll share one or two things with you, and maybe that makes sense. You know, Varun and I, right? We, work together at Snowpal. So we do head out to some of these conferences where we hear people, Fortune 500 founders, right, talk about their businesses and what it is. So a year ago, when the two of us went to some of these conferences in DC, I heard a lot of these founders. I'm talking about people who are running these $200 billion companies, $500 billion companies, really, really large companies in the US talk
Mm-hmm.
about the amount of money they were investing on AI, the capex spend, and when the follow-up question was about ROI as to what exactly those returns were, the answers were not necessarily very specific about 6 to 12 months ago. When we went to a recent conference, I can tell you they have actually quite changed quite a bit. They were able to come up with some numbers. Now, there could be two reasons for it. One is because if you don't have these numbers, the market does not react very well to it. So they were better prepared. But that being said, I also got the confidence that they are actually starting to see returns from these investments, which is amazing. But the question I have as a follow up to those two statements here, if you will, is you probably saw the Amazon layoff from 2 days ago, right? About
Mm-hmm.
15,000 people in the corporate offices.
Right.
And I'm talking to more people. It's only the tip of the iceberg in terms of people, the restructuring happening, not needing as many people, right? That's just the nature of the beast. So let's say we look 2 years into the future to the extent possible. What kind of impact, Sri, do you think the investments of these hyperscalers and the general investments on AI and people and letting go of people and employees and whatnot is going to be 6 to 12 to 24 months down the road? And just keep the Anthropic's founders statements also at the back of your mind when you respond to this question. I believe he said that you're looking at a future where 90% of the code is going to possibly be generated. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if code can be generated, and people ask me, Krish, what's going to happen to you as a developer if AI is going to write all the code? I was like, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
Before I answer the question, the one natural response I do have is I do not disagree that you're going to have to replace developers, a lot of them, with AI and these tools. But at the same time, Sri, my opinion is also that if you can replace a developer, it's going to be much easier to replace a product manager, a tester, a project manager, a scrum master, a DevOps engineer, everybody else. What I'm saying
Yeah.
is, while it's easier to replace a developer, it's just as easy, if not easier, to replace a lot of these other
Yeah.
roles. So my question to you is, uh, do you see more people being in the job market like 12 months, 24 months down the road? And the second part of that question is, what do you think is going to happen to outsourcing? In other words, India as a country has been lock, stock, and barrel in that space. The two of us come from I never worked in India. I've never had that experience. I don't know if you did, but uh, a lot of the work that happens to go to other parts of the world, one of the main reasons is because there's the cost factor, essentially, right? It's actually more affordable to get stuff done. But now, if AI is going to help us do it, the need for outsourcing and consulting is going to be very different. So, what do you think? Two-part question, right? One is, do you see a lot more people, like tens of thousands of people, looking for work in the coming months and the coming year or two? And two, what do you think is going to be the impact on outsourcing as a business because of everything that you're seeing happening in this industry?
Okay. So I think I partially answered your question before. Yes, all the jobs and roles that you were basically talking about, the traditional jobs, will definitely decrease. But that doesn't mean the people's jobs will kind of change. So again, keep in mind, whenever a big change like this happens, generative AI is one of them, very similar to like electricity or the internet. That's why I keep explaining these two. You really cannot look at your current jobs. None of your current jobs will even be like quoted as jobs in the future, or it might combine. As I said, you might have a single person who would do the product, who would do the BA, who would do the QA, who would do the DA, who would do the everything. Like, pretty much one person might get to do everything. But that doesn't mean that those are the only jobs that are available, right? Because AI is coming into play, you have to look at infrastructure, you'll have to look at green energy, you'll have to look at how the data is stored, how the data is labeled. For good AI, you need to have good data. There will be, problems around new roles around the data might actually increase. Because I'm in that space, I'm actually saying we may not need that many data engineers, but you might need data governance people, you might need policymakers. Those are the kind of jobs. I mean, I think the job, I mean, if you ask me, like, what will change, jobs like that would come in, which we did not have today. So
Okay.
you'll
What
have
about
to change
outsourcing?
outsourcing. So pretty much, I don't know how much of those can be kind of like outsourced. In fact, infrastructure management and um, some of the jobs can still be outsourced, like in infrastructure
No,
management and
no,
things like
sorry,
that.
Shri. My question specifically is a lot of the, India does a lot of software exports, right? Historically, it's been one of the biggest industries essentially. Given that you need fewer people and machines are able to do, agents are able to take, upon the responsibility of doing things that humans did, the need for more humans reasonably seems to be diminished, at least in the near term. So, my question to you is more specifically consulting as a business, right? Like companies like Infosys, TCS, and Cognizant and Wipro, these large Indian consulting companies that literally made money because of the fact that things could be done cheaper, either remotely back in India or by having, we're going to end this with a little bit of conversation about immigration, if you will. That's an important topic of today as well. But before you go there, I thought this was a natural question to ask preceding that, which is, do you see these consulting businesses, companies like this, be profitable in the near future, or do you think they're going to actually take a seismic hit?
So they have to change their model if they have to survive in the industry. They cannot be doing traditional software outsourcing. So those kind of things will be gone. But I think new things will come up. They have to quickly adapt to it. So traditional model will not work, in my opinion. But there might be jobs related to more on the governance side, which they can pick that up, then that'll be like great. And also another thing that you should keep in mind, each of these companies about 10 years ago, India did not have as many startups. Today, when you look at it, India has way more startups than it did like 5 to 10 years ago. So there's a lot of companies, there's a lot of requirements within the country itself. India itself is adopting data and AI and standards, and India has a long way to go to get good data even before they can get good data. So I think before they can get good AI. So a lot of jobs. I mean, jobs are there. You're only worried if you're worried about people's job in India. Indians will always have jobs because they have a long way to go on the AI space. But if you're really talking about these software consulting body shopping companies, yes, their model has to change. They have to adapt to what the industry is changing to and change quickly. Only then they will survive in the industry.
Personal finance. We talked about how you're managing your money, how you make your investments, how diversified or concentrated you want for those investments to be. Money you put in the stock market, the money you took out to invest in metals and gold, and I mean other kinds of metals and whatnot. We talked about data. We talked about large volumes of data, structured data, unstructured data. We talked about imaging and S3 and creating structured data out of unstructured data. Some technologies that you use, for instance, be it AWS technologies, be it DynamoDB, where you're storing data. We talked about AI, the impact of AI, some tools that are in that space, how AI has helped you and your team actually become more efficient, being able to do things faster, quicker, better, sooner, and whatnot. We also talked about some companies, from a stock market standpoint, what to invest, maybe put money here, not put money there. We talked a wee bit about immigration, what it means, where we stand in the current place and time. My very last question: what is your favorite food? Like, if you have to pick one dish, right? If you have to pick one dish, what would that be? The second part of the question is, what is a country that you've never been to, or a city, perhaps even in the US, it doesn't matter, that you actually do want to go to?
I like Thai food the best. I would probably say a drunken noodle or a Thai curry is something that I would eat any day. And
Okay.
it's very difficult because you ask a question to a foodie and who's passionate about food. So I can't limit to one. I also like vegetarian sushi, like veg rolls, California rolls.
Okay,
That's
I
my
think
favorite food.
they are simple enough answers that I don't have to explain, given our audience and where they are geographically located. So that's good. What about a place that you've not been to that you want to go to?
I would like to go to Kailash. So that's been on my, so that's very close to like Mount Everest. So just below Mount Kailash, there are two lakes. One is called Lake Rakshastal, and the other one is called Lake Manasarovar. They both are a few miles apart. One is a complete saltwater lake, and the other one is a pure water lake. So it's a very interesting geographic location. It's a place where it plays a huge it plays a huge role in Hinduism. It's believed that Lord Shiva lives there. So not for the sake of like Hinduism, but I really like going there to just be there and probably just look at the place because it's got some unique things. I mean, nobody in the world climbed Mount Kailash. So that's one place that I would definitely want to go.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for that. And again, Shri, thank you so much for sharing. There's a broad set of topics that we've covered here, right, to the extent possible in the last 90 minutes. So I do appreciate your thoughts in every aspect of that conversation. I'll include, we'll include the link to your LinkedIn profile. If there's any other link you want for us to include, I'm more than happy to do that as well. What are your quick 2 minute or however long, it doesn't matter, your closing comments to our audience?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here. You made me reflect on a number of things that I wouldn't even have thought about it. I mean, sometimes it's good to just step back and reflect what you're doing, what you've done, and what you're going to do. So this has definitely given me an opportunity to do that. And there were some interesting topics that we talked about, not so comfortable topics also we talked about, but it's good. It's always good to have a healthy discussion. So thank you so much for the opportunity. That was very interesting conversation. Thank you, Krish.
Yeah, with that, I think we'll call it wraps here. Again, folks, it was my pleasure to talk to Shree Periyakaruppan, who, again, she covered a broad range of topics, and you've probably had plenty of learnings along the way in this conversation. And if people want to know something specifically, I'm happy to, request you to come back, Shree, so you can share more specifically about, hey, if we have $100, a lot of us don't know what to do. How do I put the $100 so I can get $300 by March, right? I need it in 2 months, the way AI is heading. No, I'm just kidding. So thank you very much. Shree Periyakaruppan was our guest today. Much appreciate your time, Shree. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Take it. Bye.